Special called meeting of the Rules, Confirmation, and Public Elections Committee. I'm the chair, Kathleen Murphy, and today we're going to come together to discuss what happened with the ballots during this last election cycle. And so I'm going to just take roll as we go through the meeting. We do not need a quorum for this because we're not taking any votes today, and so we'll just get going. I'm going to start out kind of with an opening statement. I guess y'all are lucky I had an opening statement and left it at home, so lucky you. Thank you for clapping, Vice Mayor. Pretty much, since we started to hear reports of election ballots being given out wrong, kind of as that information started rolling in, I think a lot of us were very concerned about the legitimacy of this election and making sure that while we knew that ballots were secure and we are not necessarily concerned about any sort of conspiracies with our machine, it is important that the voters cast the right ballot and cast the right vote in the right election, in the right precinct, in the right area. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing for an election, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, or whether you're anything in between or outside of those, I want to make sure that you are able to vote, because that is just fundamental, our basic rights here. And so since we started getting those reports, I had been in communication. We did have this meeting scheduled, if y'all remember, for the Friday and between the election, between early voting and the election, but due to a lawsuit and pending lawsuits, we did reschedule that. So here today, we're going to hear from Jeff Roberts with the Election Commission, with the Davidson County Election Commission. We also have Wally Dietz, head of Metro Legal, who can address some, and then also Keith Durbin, head of ITS. And we also have a number of the election commissioners and staff that have joined us here today. And so I'm going to close my opening statement with that and turn it over to why don't we just go ahead and hear from the legal department to hear of where we are with any lawsuits, not lawsuits, and what matters before the courts and with the state, and then we can go into Mr. Roberts with the Election Commission.
Thank you.
Wait, oh, there we go.
Thank you, Chair Murphy. Unlike last time, there are no restrictions at all on what questions you ask Mr. Roberts or Mr. Durbin about what happened during the process. Yesterday was the deadline for individuals on the ballot who wanted to contest elections to file an election contest. No contest was filed to our knowledge. The litigation that was brought by certain individuals represented by the ACLU, that litigation was settled that Friday evening. And there is one lawsuit pending by the candidate who lost the state Senate race in State Senate District number 21, but the allegations in that complaint do not relate to the ballot assignment issue that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. So Mr. Roberts, Mr. Durbin are here to answer your questions, and I will not interfere with that, except to the extent it does intrude on the attorney-client privilege. Any advice we gave, any advice they received from us. But in terms of the substance of what went on, there are absolutely no restrictions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Dietz. Mr. Roberts, your mic should be on, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope everyone has received a packet of information that kind of outlines the issues that were before us leading up to the November 8th election. There's a cover page that gives you some general information, some recommendations on what we think we should do going forward. And then behind that, you will see precinct by precinct, address by address, every issue that we have researched over the past few weeks. So there's a wide variety of situations where everyone from our office to Metro GIS, the comptroller's office, individual voters even have caused some issues. So let's start with a couple of the easy ones where the individual voter creates an issue. If when you fill out your voter registration card, you don't give us the correct zip code or your correct address, that causes us on many occasions to put you in the wrong district. And we had a number of those, and these are not really associated with redistricting. They could have occurred years ago. And because the process to remove a voter is very formal, and we have to do many, many tasks before we can actually remove a voter, those voters stay on the rolls in an inactive capacity. That doesn't mean you can't vote. It just means that something is not correct in your address, and we need that updated. So we have a number of those in there. We have a single issue where the file that Metro GIS sends us, and this is not a map file, but it's a text file with individual records that we then load into our database, and that establishes what district you are located in. So we had a single issue where the information coming from Metro GIS, it was not correct. So we loaded 7 people, I believe, on Otter Creek into the wrong district. We had others where our office made typo mistakes where we would, instead of putting in 2005.5, we put in 2005.4 or 2005.3. That doesn't sound like a big issue, but it is significant when it comes down to getting the correct ballot. And let me give you an example. Those .3 numbers, those are called splits within a precinct. So let's take Coleman Park, for instance. It has 5 splits. So another way that you could get the wrong ballot is if the machine operator that's bringing up your ballot picks the wrong split. It doesn't mean there's a redistricting issue. It's the machine operator made an error at that time, and if the voter doesn't let us know that there's an issue and they go ahead, print their ballot, and scan it, at that point in time, we can't back up. We need the voters to tell us, my ballot doesn't appear to be correct. And then we can back up, and if we have to issue a whole new ballot, they can mark it again and then put it into the scanner. So we have an issue included in your documentation where we were trying to, after the May election in June, reduce the number of splits that we have because it's just less complicated if we have fewer splits. We made the mistake of, you have to get the right combination of Congress, Senate, House to make the split work. And if you pick the wrong one, assign the voters to the wrong one, that creates a problem. We were trying to fix a split that only had 132 residents over the age of 18, not registered voters, residents over the 18, so likely less than 100 voters. Instead of fixing it, we created a problem because we moved voters out of 2005.5 into 2005.3. Now you've impacted 1,500 voters. And when that Congress, House, Senate don't match, you've got a problem. So more quality control on our part would have likely prevented that problem. And going forward, that will be a big effort on our part to define the process that we're going to take in 2030 when we do this again, there will be essentially a book that comes off the shelf that lays out what you need to be careful, because it's not likely that everyone involved in redistricting this year will still be working for Metro in 2030. We have to leave that roadmap, or we are likely to go through this same process again when we do redistricting. The first issue on the list there was where the problem originated to begin with in 2.3. If you look at the documentation that we've included, there's some emails back and forth with Metro GIS and our staff, and the final email included a map. Our interpretation was that map was to say that 6th congressional district was correct. When you look at the map, you can see on the right-hand side the 6th congressional district, but it's pretty difficult unless you're looking and knowing that you're looking for a 7. It's on that map also. It should have been Congressional District 7 and not 6, but our interpretation of the map created that problem. Going forward, I think one of the things that we're recommending is that during redistricting, this is a very complicated process, and there are a lot of players involved, from the Comptroller's Office, Secretary of State's office, Metro GIS, and our office. We need to make an effort to double-check each other more than we did this time. We could have probably caught some of these issues up front if we had done that. Another issue is we need to, on a regular basis, compare the information we have with Metro GIS. And I'll give you a perfect example. It's included in your packet. There is Smith Springs Road. It should be Old Smith Springs Road. The original residents, when they registered, their street was called Smith Springs Road. But we've built a new street that is Smith Springs Road, and the previous is Old Smith Springs Road. Well, it just so happens that causes an issue when you're assigning the voter to a district. So if we make an effort on a regular basis to compare our information to Metro GIS, I think we will catch those kind of issues and not have them going forward. This is, if you look at some of this documentation, it's a very complicated process, and there are a lot of players that have a role in it. Our staff, we have to, during early voting, if a voter comes in and changes their address, they could change their address to a street or an address that we don't have in the system. We can change that on the fly during early voting, but our staff have to be careful. Do you adjust the top end of the range, or is there another precinct that captures the low end of that range? If you don't adjust the right one, you have now put that person in the wrong precinct. That's a little more education on our part so that our folks pay closer attention. If you've got a street that involves multiple precincts, you have to be very careful which adjustment you make on which end of the street segment. And because we have, and it's getting more regular, we have residential, commercial, residential, commercial. That means you've got a street segment that may only have 3 houses in it. Then we skip a street segment that's commercial. Then we'll have 3 more houses. That can go back and forth both ways. Included in the mix there is where we had a residential address for a number of years that is now a commercial address. So it needed to come off completely because there are no people living there and can't use that as their residence for voting purposes. I hope the list is comprehensive. This was provided by the Secretary of State and created by the Comptroller's Office when the problem originated on November the 1st. They sent us this exception list, and we have since that time gone through and looked at every single one to try to determine what caused the issue. Was it really an issue, or it shouldn't have been touched in the first place? It was good to go to begin with. And from that, I think you can get a good feel of how the issue occurred and kind of what we plan to do going forward to make sure that we don't experience it again. I'm open to any questions, any specifics. If you see an individual item on there that's in electionese and you can't translate it, let me know, and I will share with you kind of in layman's terms what happened.
Jeff, let me go ahead and ask you some basic questions.
Okay.
To get, because you did get into the weeds a lot there that we might not have understood. Am I on? Sorry, I was on here, but not on there. Let me ask you some kind of basic questions and go ahead and get them out of the way, because you did get into the weeds a little bit there, and I want to pull this information out. Are you aware of, do you know, is it likely, is it possible, was this same issue a problem in the August primaries?
It was likely that this was same issue was in August. You just have fewer people voting, fewer people knowing exactly who should be on their ballot, so it wasn't brought to our attention in August.
So in August, because it's the primary, you're picking your ballot. You
Right.
probably know a little. You expect your ballot a little bit better. But so you're saying that y'all didn't have any complaints of this in the August primary,
Not that I recall.
or not enough to rise to.
Correct. Now, like I said, we always, especially during the primary, have voters that will call and say they got the wrong ballot. Most of the time, it's, I thought this person was the Republican that I was wanting to vote for, but really they're the Democrats, so I asked for and they're not on my ballot. And people have a tendency not to bring that to our attention until they're outside in the car and they're talking to their spouse or their neighbor or whatever. At that point, we can't fix it. If it's brought to our attention before you put it in the scanner, we can essentially have a do-over on the ballot.
And so on this sheet, and what I think I heard you say was really that this issue for the November election of the databases not matching up came to light November 1st.
That's correct.
So that was after early voting.
Early voting was still going on. We had 3 more days of early voting. Okay. So early voting ended on Thursday, November the 3rd at 7 p.m. We finished up voting 8 o'clock-ish, something like that. So we had 3 more days. We were in the middle of early voting when it was brought to our attention.
And so when it was brought to your attention, who did you notify? Because I think many of my fellow council members and myself learned this on the news or heard from our constituents about it. And I think that I understand that the Election Commission is kind of a separate organization that is funded out of our budget, but primarily is a function of the state and is appointed by the state. But why was the council not notified?
I think our first effort on Tuesday when we found out about it was to, so Tuesday afternoon, 5:30-ish, the state sent us a file that the comptroller had created of the exceptions. Our focus at that time, what can we do and get in place before early voting starts Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock? That was our first focus. Wednesday morning, myself and the staff, we had essentially been there all night, but I thought the next step was to let the voters know that the potential was there so that they could check their ballot more. So I started at 9:15 reaching out to the press because the AP story was already out there. I wanted to make sure that they had seen it, asked me questions, those kind of things. The rest of the time, I was either dealing with the press or dealing with trying to figure out exactly how we were going to fix the issue so that we had fewer voters that were getting the wrong ballot. Oversight on my part should have reached out to your folks so that you would have better information that you could share with the voters too. We tried to put the information up on our website, those kind of things, but recognizing that not everyone deals with social media or the internet. I think it was a learning lesson for us, and between you and me, I had another full-time task. We were trying to get ready for the election day, which was really an issue for us because we had to figure out what poll book every voter was going to be on election day, because we have to send out a paper copy and the electronic version. And it takes about 10 hours to print and sort all of those paper poll books to get them in the right place so that in the event that we have a tornado, we can vote people in the parking lot on paper until we can get squared away and get them some electronics out there and working. So it was a big issue. We were so deep into early voting, trying to figure out then, okay, how do we get ready for election day? That oversight on my part to not notify the council that this was an issue and what we were doing.
And the reason I bring that up is because we all have some sort of email list. We all have our ways to get information out. And I know that once y'all were able to put together the list of people who early voted and were given the wrong ballot to cast, I know that several council members in here sent out robocalls or text messages, or actually just sat down and called those individual voters to let them know of that process.
Sure.
What did your staff do to let people know who were given the wrong ballot how to correct their ballot?
We essentially published the list Saturday afternoon. We were shooting for 4 o'clock to have it out there. We also touched base with all of our social media, and I was pretty much living with the press during that time frame to let them know, it's out there.
But your staff never reached, you never had any staff or volunteers directly from the Election Commission reaching out to voters, letting them know of the Election Commission's mistake and how to correct it.
Right. So keep in mind, one of the things that many voters have learned not to do is to put your phone or your email on your voter registration.
But
because people will call them.
I think what I'm hoping to hear you say is an apology to the voters for not directly reaching out to them. Several of us were able to come together and do that. Community organizations stepped up and did that. I understand that y'all were getting ready for an election and that you had a lot of tasks to do. As previously mentioned, my mother was on the Election Commission my whole grade school career, so I know how hectic it is. But I think I am disappointed to hear that a government agency messed up something that is so sacred to our American values and did not find someone in the office to sit down with the phone and make the calls to who they had.
Sure. I think we will take that as a lesson learned, and should we have any issues similar to this in the future, we will make every effort to try to reach out to the folks that we have phone numbers or emails for.
All right, I have taken up enough time. I'm going to go to Tom Cash and then Councilman Cash and then Councilman Rutherford.
Thank you, Chair. I have several questions. Stop me if you need to put me back in the queue. And thank you, Director, for being here and sharing this with us and talking about lessons learned and looking ahead to do better in the future. So there was a lawsuit. The ACLU was involved, and there was a decision as a settlement, I guess, to let some people who had been given the wrong ballot, or people who had been given the wrong ballot in early voting, to let them cast a new ballot. Instructions were I think, disseminated well about what that process was, where they were to go and do that. And I understand that that after we know who voted, you can tell who early voted and who each day has early voted. But we don't know how they voted. And so I get that once they vote, let's say that they voted erroneously in U.S. House District 6, and they were supposed to get a ballot for 7. So was there a result that kind of like it's possible? So you can't back those erroneous District 6, for example, ballots out because you don't know how they voted, right?
Well, not just how they voted, but think about when you go to early voting, you're voting on a 14-inch card. It has your choices on there. You're sticking it into the scanner, and it's dropping down into a bin that has another 3,000 or 4,000 votes in there. There's no identifying information on that ballot for you.
Right. So
you can't retrieve it.
So one of the results was that in some of these races where they got to vote in the correct ballot, there was possibly a slight overvote in the totals.
There is
there probably some if somebody erroneously voted in 6 and then they made it up and voted in 7, there might have been some District 6 votes that were over the.
Correct.
Okay.
But you're assuming though that these people even cast a vote for Congress.
Correct. I don't mean every single one of them, but there probably were some that were.
Some.
And you all decided, and I believe it was correct, that was better than disenfranchising those who were given the wrong ballot and not able to vote as the state constitution says, in the district that they're assigned. Right.
All of those ballots counted.
Right. And that was a settlement or an agreement with the ACLU. I guess my question is, and hopefully this kind of thing isn't going to happen again, that we've figured out all the kinks in the system, the erroneous assignments, and that won't happen again. But has that settlement set a policy going forward that if it happens 2 or 4 years from now and somebody, through no fault of their own, is given the wrong ballot and it becomes clear that that's the case, that they will be able to get the correct ballot and vote? Is that a policy, or was that just a one-time kind of agreement?
I would defer to the legal folks, but I would think that's a one-time because that was in a signed order specifically for this situation.
Okay. Well, I would hope that it would be a policy that if, like I said, I think the state constitution says that a voter in Tennessee is allowed to vote in the district that they are assigned.
And keep in mind that all of the votes that were cast at our office as a result of the settlement are still locked in the box and have not been touched since the day they were cast.
Gotcha. Mr. Deeds.
If I may address just a couple of things. I think there may have been some confusion about the effect of these ballots, whether they were overcounted or what. So it might be good to address that question again. You have the answer, I don't. But the second thing is, I want to say that the settlement in the litigation was something that Mr. Roberts and the Election Commission had already started to implement. So they had come up with this fix on their own. And it was enough to satisfy the ACLU attorneys, but that was already underway. it would have happened without a lawsuit. So if that helps you know what their plans might be in the future, but that was a one-off settlement for these particular cases. So if there is a next time, hopefully not, the Election Commission and council will look at it at that time.
Thank you. A couple more, if I may. So I'm assuming, and Mr. Roberts, I think you answered an email of mine about this and answered this question, that it was going to happen. I just want to find out if it has. So at some point, a couple of hundred people at least got new voter registration cards after redistricting that had some incorrect information on there. Have they gotten new voter registration cards with the correct information, or is that still in process?
Some of them have been sent out already. I can't say that all of them at this point have been sent out, but probably 2,000 of the 3,000 have already gone out.
Okay. And for a while, when those first new voter registration cards were coming out, they were done differently than in the past. They were kind of printed on a sheet of paper and trifolded. And I know that some of my constituents didn't know that they'd gotten it, and I bet they had. They just didn't know it was. Maybe they thought it was like another sample ballot or something like that. Right. So I hope there could be something going forward to highlight or distinguish it and say, hey, this is your voter registration card, so that they don't, whether it's a thicker paper or something. Right. I hope we can make it more obvious to them. We were hit with the same supply chain issues that the rest of the country has been hit with. We were unable to get a heavier cardstock. We were unable to get a colored paper because of the volume that we were needing. We Gotcha.
had to send it out to quite a large population. It cost us to print and mail almost $250,000.
I gotcha. The paper's one thing, but just something that is on there that makes it really clear. Hey, this is important. Or
right. We hear you on that issue, and we think that something like important voter information or something stamped on the outside of the envelope may help. We have to follow the post office rules as far as what we put on there and where we put it, but we are definitely looking at that.
Thank you.
Councilman Bradford.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a lot of questions that are kind of related to the individual precincts and notification as well. I'm going to be referencing my district, District 13. Some of the concerns and questions I've gotten is individuals going to the wrong precinct because the same precinct they've used for decades has changed. And also the rationale between how you divide up those precincts, because I've got 2 precincts in my district that are split and divided on either sides of other precincts. For example, 1302, who votes at Glengarry Elementary, is separated from another portion of 1302, which is along Bell Road, and it's separated by 1305. So you've got people who live on the far side of my district in that 1302 that had to come all the way to Glengarry Elementary on the other side of the district to vote. Meanwhile, 1304 votes, their precinct was the Southeast Metro facility, while 1304 is divided in between the other side of 1302. So you've got people who have to drive through other precincts to go to the precinct they have to vote at. So what thought process was going into dividing these precincts up and forcing precincts to have to cross another precinct to vote, and why one precinct is somewhat small as a large facility to vote at, whereas the largest population precinct is voting in a church whose the room where the voting machines were at is smaller than our smallest committee room. So can you explain what went into picking the precincts, dividing the precincts, and picking the locations where those precincts are at?
So when we look at where a precinct location is, most people think that every church out there wants us to come in and vote at their location. and that's not the case. We struggle to find places where we can vote. And if you remember in redistricting, we added 17 new locations because of the population size. The number of people that vote at a precinct is governed by state law. We try to stay within the window of how many people can vote there. If we need to relook at some of your locations, because we're doing this based on population data from the census, that may not work out exactly to registered voters. We can look at those to see if, maybe we need to pull a street over and get it into the location that has more space. But that's just part of the shakeout process when we do a redistricting every 10 years.
Councilman Bradford, just a second. Mr. Roberts, first term, in my first term, some point over the last 7 years, you were in Rules Committee, and I asked y'all to please I asked the Election Commission to reach out to council members. We are the ones who know our street and our voters like the back of our hands. Can I get a commitment out of you to sit down with each council member and go over these precincts and precinct locations and have you make a commitment right now to elicit our help in finding precinct locations that are appropriate for their size?
We would be happy to sit down with any council member that wants to do that. Keep in mind, the worst thing we can do is come up with a location and then the next election change it and the next election change it. We need a location that we can feel fairly confident this is a long-term solution, or your problem with the voters will get even bigger because we're constantly changing the voting location.
Councilman Bradford.
So a follow-up with talking about the precincts is, so my precinct, there's 4. Is that the case with every other council district? You got 4 precincts. Is that set in stone, or is it just?
It could be fewer or more depending on the population in that district.
Okay. Then my last set of questions revolves around early voting and election day locations. So a lot of criticism was given to Davidson County for, even though we had a 2-week early vote, only the first week was only at Howard School and the second week was countywide, whereas other counties across the state, all their early voting precincts were open the entire time. So why are we not utilizing all of our early voting locations the entire 2 weeks? And the second part of that question is, I believe there are some counties in Tennessee where even on election day, you can pretty much vote anywhere you want as long as you're a registered voter. Have we looked into that, or why are we not looking at making it easier for the voters to go vote by saying wherever you vote or early vote, you can still go vote there on election day?
So let me take your last question first. Those are called convenience centers, and those are established by law from the legislature allowing a county to do that. So Wilson County, Williamson County, those have chosen to do that as the legislature has given them the authority. One of the things that we would have to look at here, it would require us to have 35 convenience centers. You would also have to have in each of those locations one big enough to accommodate anybody from the county. So you would have to have a facility like an early voting site up in District 1. That may be a challenge. We could probably do it in a half, but, we might be stretching it to go and find one in all 35 of our districts. Does that make it clear on the convenience centers? Okay, and refresh me on your other question.
The other question was, every other county, they were able to vote at every early voting location the entire 2 weeks, whereas here in Nashville, the only time you could vote anywhere was the second week. why are we not utilizing all of our early voting locations the entire 2-week early voting period?
So what we've traditionally done is look at the anticipated voter turnout for an election and base our early voting schedule on that turnout. So if you look back at presidential in 2020 November, or you look back at November of 2018, we voted significantly larger numbers of people during those elections because the races caused enthusiasm and got more voters out to vote. If we looked at the number of people that voted early in August and compared that to either 2014 or 2018, we were much closer to the number of people that voted in 2014 when we only opened Howard first and then all the other locations the second week. So that was the logic behind doing that. We will do whatever council, the commission wants. I think our effort was what represents the voting public that we anticipate. How many people do we think will turn out for this election? And can we accommodate those without long lines, those kind of things? And I'm not aware of, except for the last day when we traditionally have long lines at 6:30 in the afternoon. The rest of the time, you could get in an early vote pretty quickly.
The last thing I would just like to hear from Mr. Durbin on IT about, from their perspective, the whole situation that we just went through.
We're going to go to Mr. Durbin here, and then I have Hancock, Evans, Allen, Henderson, and then back to Cash. Keith, you should be on.
Thank you very much for the question. I appreciate it very much. So ITS and our new division, which is the GIS division, which was formerly in planning, have had a very long working relationship with the Election Commission. We are as dedicated as they are to making sure that every voter has the opportunity to vote, has the information they need to vote, knows where to vote, and all those kinds of things. And we do that with them through our website, through social media, and other channels, as you're aware. We are involved at the early stages of this process. So I sent Council Lady Murphy, a memo last week that our department put together the day after the news started hitting, where our staff went through the process from the beginning of the redistricting process within the planning department, how we supported the planning department through the ESRI redistricting tool, through though that information is then sent over to the Election Commission, through the processes of iterative review and correction that happens all within kind of the March timeframe. So it is a very detailed process. Some of the reason that happens is because the GIS system that we use is ESRI is a GIS system. The voting system that the Election Commission uses is not GIS-based. It is segment-based. So part of the reason for the iterative processes is that they give us a file that they cannot, in their system, look at visually and determine whether voters are actually within the district or not based on the information they have. We provide them the visuals, they review that, they send us changes, we put that in, and so it's an iterative process until the Election Commission is convinced that each voter is in the right position. One of the other things that my staff does really well, Jennifer Higgs is probably, many of you have worked with Jennifer through the years. She is very thorough. She is very good at what she does. She also takes impeccable notes and keeps a very good email chain. So we can trace back through all the steps and all the iterations that took place to make that happen. We even I since heard the 7 emails that Jeff mentioned earlier that were a mistake on ITS's part. We have an email where we pointed that out to his team. And so we're going to be providing that on. That's how thorough she is and how fast she is. So we are very supportive of them. The memo details that process of that iterative work. It appears to us that after that final iteration, the Election Commission staff made some additional changes that just didn't get back through that iterative process. We're available for that iterative process, but we rely on the Election Commission to request that. One of the suggestions we make in the memo is that the potential for the Election Commission system to be a GIS-based system as opposed to a non-GIS-based system, and then potentially there are additional linkages. But again, that's just a suggestion, but again, that's not our decision to make. That's the Election Commission's decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Durbin. And you did send me that memo, and I am did the rest of us get that? If not, Keith, if y'all will send that out. I'm sorry. It's one of those where I wasn't sure if it came to me, if I got early access or not. So I apologize, council members, for not sharing that back out. Council Lady Hancock. Oh, I can hold.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you coming here to talk to us. It's super exciting to get the opportunity. I did want to remind you that when you turned to Council Lady Murphy and said between me and you that we're on live television, and so it was really not just between the two of you. Maybe that was just a saying, just wanted to confirm. And because we are on live television and Councilman Bradford brought up the redistricting precinct changes, and he's not the only one that was affected by that. Obviously, we've had lots of changes. I just wanted to refer to the email that I got from Mr. Medley at the Election Commission that was super helpful in explaining to my constituents one of the main reasons for the change and the reason why my neighbors and I have to drive 2.5 miles to the old location where we used to vote and then another 2 miles to the new location is because that the law states we are not allowed to split a Senate district between 2 Senates at one polling location. And there's also different rules on how far from a particular district the precinct can be. So I think those are important facts to keep in mind. So the main quandary or pondering we were having before coming to this meeting is wondering if this was a computer error or if it was human error. And it's my understanding through your explanation that this was primarily human error. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the paragraph of explanation at the end of your statement in the packet you gave us says in the last half is that you need to ensure that each of the entities rely on the others to ensure quality in the end product. And what do you mean by that specifically?
So exactly what Mr. Durbin was explaining. We need to, on a regular basis, as we go through the process of redistricting, bounce our information off of GIS, and let's all agree. And GIS would bounce their information off the comptroller's site, so that we are all in agreement as to, is everyone in the correct district?
And when you bounce the information, what are you actually doing?
I'll have to let Keith describe exactly how that works.
Thank you.
I think that would be a comparison, just a comparing files, the data in the files to make sure they align, that if there was a discrepancy, that it was flagged and then reviewed by somebody in the Election Commission office. And so that's really, when I talked about the iterative process, that's really what I was describing, whether visually through some kind of illustration or by comparing to almost like tables.
Right, and I'm sorry to just keep diving deeper, but what data are you going to compare? If you're looking at a map, we looked at a map before and we didn't see the numbers, so what data are you looking at? Are you looking at specific voters and the sheet, you know, a data sheet given by the state that says this specific address should be here? Or are you not looking that specifically? How deep are you diving?
And Keith, I guess aren't all voters are assigned a voter ID number by the state? I think that plays into what the council lady is.
So you are exceeding the limits of my detailed knowledge. So I am speaking at a high level, and again, I'll defer back to Jeff. But it's comparison of the data that we want to be the same. So if it's 10 fields that we need to be the same, we would compare those 10 fields, whatever. I mean, that's a standard practice. Now, I can't tell you exactly what those are, and I defer to Jeff on that.
And the fields would be the street segment. A street segment could be 200 Bracala Road through 250, but only the evens. The odds may be in a different district. We would need to be able to have that information, what district, and then what congressional, state house, state senate, metro council, all of that would need to match up as we share that information. So it's like Keith said, it's an iterative process that we need to spend additional effort on so that we can ensure that we do not have this problem going forward.
And Councilmember, this is not a new process either. We've used this same software. We've been working with the Election Commission for a very, very long time. I know this is the second or third time that Jennifer Higgs has gone through this. As also, we've worked with them directly. So this isn't new.
But we just didn't dive into the data deep enough, or we would have found the discrepancies earlier.
The iteration didn't happen enough. So there was a change after the last iteration, and so we didn't get a chance to validate again, is the issue that I was referring to.
When was the change when was the last iteration, first of all?
So from my understanding, the memo that we put together, the work that had been, and we will get this to you, the work that we had done, the process was completed by March 21st, 2022.
And the redistricting was done before then, right? There was one more change?
Well, March 21st was the last file, I think, we received from Metro GIS. But like Keith has mentioned, it does not appear that the changes we made after the 21st went through the same iterative process that the previous, all the other redistricting changes.
So the changes, who is the we you're referring to when you say the changes we made after the last iteration?
County Election Commission.
Okay, so the state had not made any changes. We had all the information we needed from the state prior to the last iteration. Is that correct?
We had all of the information that the state provided. Mm-hmm. That's not to say that, as you can see in the documentation that we provided, some of that might not raise some questions where apartment complexes are split into, those kind of things, that, again, those probably should have been, let's just verify that everyone agrees we're ready to split this apartment complex down the middle. Or these people in the city of Belmead are either in or out of the city limits. Same thing, Forest Hills, Oak Hill. It's a layered process that is bigger than just the state's congressional, state house, state senate.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, I won't go too more deep in the weeds. So far I've just underlined or talked about one of the statements, the rely on others to ensure quality. The other one that is very vague is comparing work product during the redistricting effort. I mean, you could look at a map and look at someone else's map and say, oh, that's good, but that's not very detailed and that's not very deep diving. There's also needs to be ongoing data comparison to ensure quality is maintained. And that doesn't just mean glancing at this 200 to 250 and thinking it's okay. It means going in and taking, random data points and checking these individual voters, and especially the ones that are on the lines to see if they're there.
We agree. And so let's say between now and the August election.
Let's say between now and March, we might have to redistrict again. How are you going to ensure the quality of the ballots, for next August election?
We will make sure that the iterative process that we go through with Keith and his staff is very deep and very detailed.
Super. That's what I want. Thanks.
All right. So, Council Lady Evans. Oop, sorry. We're playing hot potato on your mic over here.
Thank you, and thanks for being here today. I had actually wanted to go back to the packet just to make sure I understand something. On the first page, I'll just use the first entry as an example. It's 2-03, and then there's the 1,029. Is that related to the number of people that are impacted, all those numbers that are in parentheses? Okay, thank you for that. And then going back to the part of the conversation you had at the very beginning where you were talking about inactive status for residents or voters, and also kind of connecting to the street name challenges that you were describing, where names have changed or we add new streets and that kind of thing. How do street name changes get shared? Do they come through GIS and
Right.
the team?
GIS used to be part of planning that would do that. Now they're part of Keith's group. So I assume planning shares them with Keith and they then share them with us.
So NDOT actually owns the street maps, and so yes, we help manage that, and we help that consistency. So those base maps they get from our staff.
Okay, and then thank you for that. And then as far as when a street name is changed or there's an update to that street that impacts somebody's voter registration, would that then trigger that registration being updated, or would they still sit in that inactive status?
They would still sit in that inactive status unless the voter takes some initiative. That could be no more than signing a petition. That brings them out of the inactive status because they're telling us, this is my new address. You're only in inactive status mainly because we have sent you mail and the post office tells us this is not deliverable.
Thank you for
we get a lot
clarifying
of
that. Okay, and so it doesn't have anything to do necessarily, like if you had like one of the examples that's in the packet is Lincoya Bay Drive, but it should have been Lincoya Drive. So if somebody listed Lincoya Bay Drive, that's not going to make them inactive.
No. And in fact, that example that you've given, that was a mistake on our part, could have been made 5 years ago when the original voter was entered into the database. We put Lincoya Bay Drive instead of a Lincoya Drive. We've now changed it to Lincoya Drive.
Got it.
And that it should be transparent to the voter.
Thank you for clarifying that. And then on the kind of thinking about, now I recognize that, as you described, this is multi-layered issues that all converged in one election between being gerrymandered and everything else that was happening. But are kind of related, if we were to put Davidson County in relation to other counties across the state, are we doing pieces of this process that in other counties, in other parts of the state, that they are relying on like the secretary, and I'm using examples because I don't know, Secretary of State's office or Comptroller's office or something like that? Are we taking on more ownership of some of these responsibilities than maybe other counties do?
We do. Keith, you want to?
Yeah, I'll speak to that because it's in the memo. So the state provides the same ESRI redistrict software that Metro uses. So they provide it for others because obviously we are a more sophisticated state or county than name another very small county. And so the reason we do that is that planning wants to have additional and more comprehensive demographic data, and then the capacity for public input. And because planning requires those capabilities, they have chosen very specifically to for us to implement our own version of this redistricting software. Now, I don't know how taking planning / ITS out of the mix, how that would impact our operations. It's not something I have looked into, but you are correct, and there is something that we're doing that a lot of other counties are probably not doing just because they're not sophisticated enough to do it on their own.
My concern would be that if I call Keith with an issue on redistricting, I call Keith directly. I don't have to get in line behind 90 other counties for an issue that needs to be resolved. So I think this benefits Davidson County to have the relationship that we've got with ITS.
Yeah, and thank you for explaining how that works, since I wasn't familiar. And kind of looking, and I asked the original question about the packet and the corresponding numbers, because I did have an apartment complex that was impacted, and the people that had voted, I guess it was came through the council office about the list of people, and we all independently reached out. So I'm grateful that my percentage of people in the apartment complex was very small in comparison to the volume that could have been impacted. So that's a good thing, but it makes me more cognizant in the future about how do I communicate within the areas, where I saw that impact. So I'll be thinking about that. But going back to what Councilwoman Murphy was speaking to earlier, the more communication we have, the better, because I could have called probably one person who could have then sent an email to the entire apartment complex and gotten faster attention than me calling everybody individually. And that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady. We have Council Lady Allen, and then Henderson, and then Cash.
Thank you. 3 short, very in the weeds questions. In the Election Commission, are addresses stored with the fields separated for the street number and the street, or is it all just one address?
It's separated.
It is separated, okay. Because I've seen versions where it was all together, and it's a whole lot harder to figure out whose district things are in if you can't just...
Even the type of street, drive, street,
Gotcha.
That's separate.
Each
also.
one of those, so you can sort by street and all that kind of thing.
You can, but when you're dealing with 18,000 streets, that you need to, modify what you're searching.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I think that just makes things more just easier to analyze and find things. So I'm glad to know that that's the case. And then just to get back to the splits, if I'm understanding this correctly, what causes a split is the fact that our congressional districts and our Senate districts and our state districts don't necessarily align with our council districts. Is that where it happens?
So within the council district, you may have the need to have multiple. So I would need a Congress 7 and a Congress 5. I would need a House 59 and a House 56, and maybe I need a 21 and a 19 Senate. So each one of those flavors I have to have available at that precinct, and that machine operator then has to look at your application, prints out, and it'll say on there, we've changed it a little bit, it'll say like style 39. That specifies that combination. Right. And that's how you get that ballot to come up on the ballot marking device.
Gotcha. And I think I'm making a a suggestion to someone who's not in this room, but in the process of dividing all these things up, I mean, number one, it seems like we should be divided by things that we have in common. And it seems like we've created a problem that makes your life a whole lot harder that is not necessarily based on any real value.
Mr. Roberts, you might not want to answer.
You might want to. But, just in terms of, one more way to look at this, we could avoid this problem if perhaps we didn't cut things so finely at those different levels. So I guess my other question is, will you ever be testifying at the state about this, how this process works and the implications of all that chopping?
We have already had a meeting with the coordinator of elections for the state. They're doing an investigation as prescribed by the order that we agreed to kind of see what caused it, what we do in the future. So I'm sure that, down the road, should this move to the legislature with legislation that they may put forward to help address some of these issues, that there's a potential that I might have to
have that discussion. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady. Next, we have Council Lady Henderson. And I will say, as we're transitioning Council Lady Henderson, leading into our previous meeting that we were going to hold between early vote and Election Day, I did speak with the Comptroller's office and I did speak with the Secretary of State's office and kind of all of this. And I do expect those conversations to continue. And at some point, we, as a Rules Committee and the greater body, may want to ask them for some more input. Council Lady Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. And I was a bit tardy today, so Mr. Roberts or Chair, if I do ask a question that's redundant to something that's been addressed before, please don't hesitate to let me know, and I will watch the recording. Mr. Roberts, I want to ask you just to make a note about an email I sent you on November 7th. At 1:56 p.m. And I know you were getting a whole lot of email. I want to thank you for responding to me, very particular to a certain constituent. I had a single constituent who was particularly concerned, and you helped me kind of take that to ground and figure that out. I did, in that same email, not expecting a reply at that busy time, please understand, but make some suggestions and ask some questions around general communication in these sort of transitional redistricting years. And, and so maybe those are, advice for nine years from now. But I think what I'm mindful of in District 34 in Southwest Nashville, by adding up obviously 3 or 4 districts, significantly impacted numbers in the thousands, but by my looking at this document, there are only 3 or 4 other districts with more affected constituents than District 34, 125 affected constituents. I had no idea that was the case. My district is particularly complex because of all the satellite cities and adjacencies. So 2/3 of the city of Oak Hill is within District 34, or was. Now it's entirely in 25. City of Forest Hills, I have adjacency with the city of Belmead. Some of those kind of challenges I'm seeing kind of come through in this document. So I guess I would ask, going forward, I did ask for the list that was specific to my district. I think I did that through the council office or through the prescribed process. I did not receive that. And so, I sent a election day early kind of 6 a.m. reminders, the links you'd provided and so forth. If I'd had a little more kind of color on what the challenges were particular to my district, I think I would have composed that email differently, perhaps in a way that would have been more helpful. So just in that communication space, I think what happens in these transitional times, if you do not provide us kind of a standard template about how to articulate really distilling it down, kind of what's happening here, right? What you're talking about, like, well, there's a Senate district, and then there's your satellite city, and then this is how I think constituents can appreciate what a challenge this is, and perhaps not feel so angry when they understand kind of the orders of complexity. But if Councilman Pulley is talking about it in one way, and I'm talking about it in another, and my constituents who know themselves to be in Council District 34 currently, when they get that voter registration card and it says, oh, now you're in Council District 25, we don't know how to talk about that. Is Councilman Pulley now their council member? Am I their council member? They have already got a presumption that this is, quote, wrong, because they know they're in 34 now. They're my constituent. They're getting my newsletter. So then there's already kind of a feeling of, and a nervousness about, something's wrong here. And so I think we need to be much more intentional and proactive in our communication. That letter that comes with your new voter registration card, it should address that. You may find that you are in a different council district or something to that effect. And so my email has several suggestions around that, and I would appreciate some response on that. And I guess also I would say the neighborhood in which I reside used to be in a split precinct at the JCC, which was much more approximate to that neighborhood. Not being aware, we had a temporary location at Grace Community Church, way out at the county line in the GSD, but outside of a satellite city. Again, all the layers of complexity of what needs to happen in a council district that includes all these satellite cities. But I didn't really get any forewarning or messaging on that. I guess Forest Hills Baptist had some construction for a while. And so I had explained to constituents, well, you're out there at Grace Community because of in-progress construction at Forest Hills Baptist. But I didn't get any preview on, now construction's done at Forest Hills Baptist, but now you're no longer in a split precinct over here at the JCC where you can, throw a stone from your house. You got to drive all the way out to the county line with also, Mr. Roberts, an address, which is a complexity in my district, that says Brentwood, Tennessee. So now imagine the confusion for my constituents who reside very obviously in the Metro USD, nowhere near the county line. So my constituents who live along the county line and have Brentwood mail but live in Davidson County, they get that. But people in my neighborhood who live solidly in the Metro USD off of Highway 100 or Harding, when they see that they have to now vote in Brentwood, they're like, what's wrong, right? So I would ask that we as council members can anticipate those concerns. We can assist in communicating appropriately around them. But if you don't give us the information ahead of time, we can't work together. Thank you.
Mr. Roberts, do you want to respond?
I could say we will need a lot of help from council members as we approach the August election, because they have a council person today in this district that for the August election, they're in a different district and will be electing, potentially a totally new person to them. That's very hard to get across, that you're in both, for a certain period of time. So we're open to any suggestions that you might have that will help us communicate that concept. We didn't specifically spend a lot of time talking about the council districts before the August and the November elections, because it was already complicated enough, and those races weren't, being considered at that time. But the August election's right in front of us, and we need to start some of that communication, like you mentioned, to kind of get the voters prepared for something different from what they've been used to.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I think that is a little bit more along the lines of the commitment that I asked you for earlier in the meeting, and I will take it upon our committee to continue to follow up with that and make sure that happens. So in the queue, I've got Councilman Young, Cash, and Evans. Councilman Young, you're on the floor.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you for the transparency that's going on. This is a difficult, I guess, conversation to talk about something so important as an election. But I do want to say that the issues in my district, District 10, including the satellite city of Goodlettsville, the weekend before the election, I was through the roof, so happy and impressed with particularly Mr. Will French, and he stayed in contact with me throughout the weekend as issues arose or were identified, so those people could be contacted because we had, a bizarre issue where people, a precinct in Jolton was issued during early voting, City of Goodlettsville election ballot, but those were identified. The folks in Goodlettsville having issues were identified. You got that information to me. Will worked throughout the weekend, as I'm sure a lot of your staff did, and I really appreciated that. Now, with that said, I am kind of, and I know I was tardy, but I do feel like maybe this was something more specific to my district. Was how does it happen that a precinct in Jolton had so many voters assigned as being inside city limits of Goodlettsville when the city limits haven't changed since 1963? And so did we figure out why that happened, how that happened, and how to prevent that? Because it ended up being a substantial number of folks, and in the elections for our satellite cities, 100, 150 votes can completely change the outcome if we don't catch it. Thanks.
Sure. We've gone back and looked at that. The only logic that we can wrap our heads around is that we were looking for a certain number of voters in a precinct, and it just so happened that those two precincts had about the same number of population, not voters, but population. And we, oversight on our part, chose the wrong precinct to include inside of the city of Goodlettsville. And we actually had to go back and talk to the city manager, and he had to look at the maps just to be sure. So, and it may be because since 1966 that it's changed, that no one was, up to speed on exactly where the lines were drawn. Does that kind of answer your question?
Well, it did, but then the lines haven't changed.
They haven't changed, and that's what I'm saying.
Right.
They haven't changed in so long that the city manager had to go back and make sure that where we were putting them was the correct location.
Right, okay.
It had been such a long time since they changed.
Sure. That's what I didn't understand, is that there hasn't been a change, and per the Metro Charter cannot be a change. That's, I guess, what I was thrown. But the equal number of folks, I can see if you're going through a spreadsheet, I get that. But I do, again, want to really compliment. I was very impressed with how great Will French was, helping me throughout the weekend. And he was communicating with the candidates in the Goodlettsville city race, as was I. And so, yes, it was not an ideal situation, but I did feel like your office was doing everything in their power to make things as good as we could within the law. So thanks for that.
Absent the unbelievable work by the staff, we would not have accomplished what we did for this election.
Councilman Cash.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. I kind of want to go back to some stuff that Councilman Bradford brought up about kind of the following redistricting, the assignments of precincts, and how there are a lot of people in the county that were surprised at and first went to the wrong place, and then were told, no, wait, you have to go here. I think the voter registration cards not being quite as apparent might have been a part of that. And so one thing, Director, that you said, and I didn't catch all of it, and I want to make sure I understand, like, which of two answers it was. I wrote down, you were talking about, like, changing precincts after today, I guess. And you said the worst thing we can do, and I think you were saying is change it a lot, like every year, but I want to make sure if you're saying that the worst thing we could do is continually be confusing about it, or if you were saying we shouldn't change it at all until the next redistricting.
No, it's impossible not to change because we will have a lot of turnover in our voting location sites, and we will have to, find new ones and notify the voters that there has been a change.
Gotcha. So on a couple of things on that. One, I just looked up the Metro Schools calendar, and Metro Schools closes on, we have 3 election days during the next school year. Initial August Metro General runoff in September, and potentially a presidential primary in early, like February or March. in and schools closed all 3 of those days for elections. And I know, having been a Metro employee, that a part of that is there was some concern about a lot of people coming into the building, having kids there, so they shut down schools. So the public schools have an option of being a polling place, or can we compel them to be a polling place?
The state law allows us to compel them to be, but we try to work with Metro Schools. I mean, they're a big partner. We send them our calendar so that they can, plan ahead as to when elections are going to be for those known elections. But it's important for us to be a partner with the schools.
Fair enough, but I guess I did hear you say, I believe, when answering Councilman Bradford's question, that sometimes we do run into there aren't enough polling places, or we struggle to find polling places. I know churches, they have an option, or other buildings might have an option. We can't compel them to, which I get. But I hope, and you can reach out to us, or you can reach out to me for sure, if there are schools that are reluctant and we need some polling places near that school. Like, I would be glad to be a partner in helping, make sure that happens. And this is a little different, but I'll tell you, in my district, I had a lot of people, and all 3 elections that we've had, I went around to all 3 different polling places throughout election days just to see how things were going. And generally, they were going really smoothly, but there were a lot of people, and I've emailed you about this, there were a lot of people that would go to one place first, and they would find out it's the wrong place, and then they'd go to the other place. And it was frustrating to them, and I don't think it's good for turnout. But I think, and I know what happened in my district is that in redistricting, District 18 was under by a considerable margin, so they had to pull in, a bunch of people. And in my district, that pulled in like 12th to 10th, but also Peabody College, like a big portion of Vanderbilt, and those voters were assigned to Aiken Elementary, but now I've got people looking across the street at Aiken Elementary, but they have to go across the district to vote. And so I may have said this to you in an email a couple of months ago, but I've said it to Vanderbilt, and will continue, and I'm glad to help, that we have basically there's displacement and having to shift around because of these Vanderbilt students. And they're not really showing up, except in presidential elections. That precinct, that polling location is not very busy, and the other 2 are. And I mentioned to Vanderbilt in a meeting that I had with them, hey, it would be great if you all could pony up a voting location. Belmont, I told them, Belmont has 2. They've ponied up Curb Center and the Sports Sciences. Like, let's see you jump on board and provide one, and maybe some of those Vanderbilt students would be more likely to vote if their polling location is close to them and kind of in their community. So that's something I'm happy to work with you and your team on. But that's just kind of one example of how, the changing of the districts can kind of shift people around. And anyway, thank you.
All right, Council Lady Evans, I'm going to come back to you. We're going to go to Council Lady Gamble.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here today to kind of explain what happened. I want to also say that there were some issues in District 3, the district that I represent, as far as polling locations, and you all did a great job in correcting that prior to the election, as well as making sure that there were adequate machines at a new polling location place where we had issues at the August election. So when you're talking about how things may shift and change as a result of people moving around and things happening, is there a particular threshold that you look at as far as making changes? And I'll give an example. And initially, you all had established a polling place where many of residents, including myself, had to go more than 3 miles out of the neighborhood to vote. And so, and that's, I guess, how it was before the August election. But prior to the August election, this past August, you corrected that and established a new polling place closer in the community for all of those voters that were having to travel 4 and 5 miles out of the neighborhood to vote. That was a big help. And although there weren't enough machines there in August, that issue was corrected in November. So I said all this to say, is there a particular threshold that you look at when you're considering how you're changing polling locations for people so that we can have a better understanding and the public can have a better understanding that it's not just arbitrary, and although people are being sent outside of their community when there is a polling place in their community, because there's one less than a mile from me that I voted at for years, and now we've been moved to this new polling location, just to give the public a better understanding of how these decisions are made, if you could speak to that.
So the size of a polling location, those are defined in state law. We have a maximum limit that we have to stay within. And the distance that you may have to travel, there's no specific limitation that I know of. Myself, my polling location changed after redistricting, so I'm driving 5 miles now to my new polling location. Out on the far end of West Nashville, and I have to drive to Gower Elementary School. So it just depends on where we have a location that we've identified, a church or a school or whatever that will satisfy our needs. And two, we have to make sure that there's enough parking. Is it handicap accessible to some degree? It doesn't have to be complete, but, does it have handicap parking spaces? All of those kind of things that some of your older churches present some challenges for us. But we're open to sitting down and having a discussion that, I'm driving past my previous polling to go to my new one. The problem is the state law defines how we can break up Senate lines, and that may be why you're having to drive further than you used to, is because that Senate line has changed.
Well, I guess I'm wondering if there's a magic number of voters or population that you would look at establishing a new polling places, because that's what happened in this case. There were so many people being rerouted to a location that was 5 or more miles away that you all were able to open up a new location closer in that community so that those voters could be closer in their community. So I'm just wondering, is there a particular number or what the rule is on that?
We can look at those kind of things just to see if that's a possibility. I will tell you, it's a challenge for us to find polling locations. Every time one closes or they say we don't want to do this anymore, we're struggling to find a location.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your work in finding that community center, Parkwood Community Center, which is the new polling location. And it was very productive. I was there in November, very smooth, and people are very happy that they are able now to vote closer to home. So thank you for addressing that.
And your question about the machines and the equipment, keep in mind, we had to create 17 new polling locations. So we have to outfit that completely with scanners, voting machines, EPBs, those kind of things. We are stretched to the max right now, and we'll be coming to the council with our budget request this year for 2023, July, so that we will be prepared for the presidential election in 2024.
Hopefully we can get that August as well. But appreciate that information as well. Thank you.
So, Mr. Roberts, there's been several questions, and you've alluded to or mentioned different pieces of what is required under state law for precincts. You talked about splitting them and how they can be split and how many times, so on and so forth. What would be great is if you would work with our attorney has stepped out of the room, but work with Margaret Darby to get us a memo of the summary of the state legislation around how precincts can and can't be drawn and split up and that kind of thing. That would be wonderful to have. So, Council Lady Evans, I guess I'll come around back to you now. You have your mic ready. One moment. Okay, go. You have the floor.
I'm ready to rock. Thank you. Councilwoman Henderson's comments reminded me of something that I completely forgot to ask, and it's probably the most important thing. On the any subsequent information that we get about the outcome, will we see any demographic-related information as far as where these addresses were, any economic information? And the reason why I'm asking is because my apartment complex happens to be income restricted. Like, I could tell from the appended data in the voter information that I had access to, ethnicity information and that kind of thing. And so will we have a summary that kind of speaks to any of that at some point? Thank you.
Because demographic data is not something we collect on the voters as a required field, I'm afraid that it might not give you the true picture that you're probably looking for. I can tell you of the two biggest areas impacted were in 2-3 in North Nashville, or in 2005 over around Nob Hill in the Hillwood area. So those are really two completely different demographic regions as a whole.
Okay, so the answer is no. And I guess what I'm thinking back to, Chair, is, when you look at the redistricting information, that we see from planning, you can see based on the area and that kind of thing.
And I just leaned over to ask Mr. Durbin if that's something that they can pull. And so this may be a request maybe back to planning that they can conglomerate around together, or it may be something that we need to ask the political parties to pull out of their voter database for us. Because they are, as many of us know, our voter database that we get from political parties has other consumer databases put together. And so that's how we get those likely to be this and that. But he is right. The neighborhood that I live in and split with Councilman Druffel and Council Lady Roberts had a significant number, and that those demographics were very different from when you had identified some of yours.
Yeah, and I think, and the reason why I asked that question, of course, it's important to, in our further conversation with residents, to illustrate that it was a diverse issue that impacted a variety of people across the county and not targeting a specific group. So thank you for that.
Oh, perfect. And so from here, I have taken various notes of things that I would like to request from the Election Commission. And so I'm going to ask that, and I'll send an email out to the council and ask all of y'all to, if you have any follow-up information or specific statistics or data or whatever, let's send those into, and I'm let's see, which staff member is not in the room? Well, we tend to send those things to Danielle in the council office, so I'm just going to put her on the spot and ask that you send those to her. And then our committee, the Rules Committee, will put together a kind of a list of things to get them to the right department, whether that be the Election Commission, ITS, or be planning. And I think we have come to the end of our list. There's one thing that I wanted to hit on. Mr. Roberts, you mentioned, and I guess this is more of a soapbox for all of West Nashville, you mentioned making sure that precincts have parking spaces. And again, I've mentioned my mother being on the Election Commission. She was on the Election Commission when they created early voting, and so I'm very aware of why Belmead City Hall is one of our early voting sites and super convenient for my voters. But the parking there is a serious issue that we need to discuss, because I did try to go vote early 3 times, and after circling the parking lot 3 times each time, I went home. And I'm very fortunate to work from home, so I had that flexibility, but I can guarantee you that the majority of my voters do not have that time on their hands to keep going to Belmead, who chop up their parking lot in a way that makes it impossible for people to vote there. But I do love my Belmead voters that work there. The people who work that poll are fabulous. Council Lady Henderson, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate your point. I wanted to share that I often vote early at the Belmead City Hall, which is on the WeGo 3B transit line. That I and my son can take to school, and I can head down that way. So all that to say, again, that goes to communication. People like to vote the way they like to vote and drive, and that's fine. I'm not trying to make anybody take the bus to vote, but for those who might not even consider that it's an option, if we are proactive in our communication and sharing all the precinct locations and how they are aligned with transit, that could be a helpful resource to our community. Thank you.
And I expect that to be something to send to Danielle for us to master map out. Any other council members have any other comments? I know several people have been in and out of the room. I did want to and maybe embarrass AJ Starling. AJ, how long have you been on the Election Commission? 20-something years, y'all. AJ has seen it all, heard it all, and had to deal with several generations of Murphys. And so I just wanted to personally thank and congratulate him for tolerating and putting. And quite honestly, I mean that is a community service commitment beyond adding several of us up, isn't that? So AJ, thank you so much. You are one of my personal heroes. So. And we expect you to stay on there until forever. So with that, with nothing else, thank you so much, election commissioners and staff, and Mr. Roberts for coming, Mr. Durbin for coming, Mr. Dietz for coming, and council members. We will continue to stay on this because access to voting is a fundamental right in America, and access and choice in voting style is paramount. And so thank you so much for being here today. Oh. Just kidding. Mr. Delinas, let me turn on. Your mic is on.
I just wanted to thank you for a very productive session. We appreciate it. There was a lot of detailed questions, and I'm sure we've all figured out that there are a lot of details involved in going through redistricting, and I would just urge you to keep asking questions. We'll try to address them, and we're going to keep working on this till we get it right, and we really do appreciate how productive this session was.
Thank you, Mr. Delinas. Mr. Young, did you have anything else that you wanted to add? Not right now. All right. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.